Imagine a region as vast as half of Europe, plunged into a freezing winter, where communities struggle for survival while being crushed by the state. Welcome to Siberia, a land forgotten by many, but today becoming a battleground for resistance against Vladimir Putin's regime. In this video, we dive into a fascinating and little-known story: the Siberian Battalion, a group of Russian dissidents fighting alongside Ukraine to overthrow a system that has marginalized them for centuries. Chapter 1. Siberia, a suffering land. Siberia, an immensely vast region, accounts for nearly 77% of Russia's territory. While most people know little about this area, it plays a key role in Russia's history and politics. Due to its harsh climate, this region has been a place of repression, especially during the Soviet years, when thousands of individuals were sent to the Gulag camps. Indigenous peoples, such as the Yakuts, Tuvans, and Kalmyks, were exploited and subjected to oppressive Russian policies. But beyond the physical repression, Siberia has also been marked by a systematic attempt to erase indigenous cultures. The traditions and languages of indigenous peoples were forced to yield to an imposed Russian culture. This process of Russification has left deep scars, and although the majority of the population is of Russian origin, indigenous peoples continue to fight for their rights and identity. Chapter 2. The growing discontent. Discontent in Siberia is palpable. This region, although extremely rich in natural resources such as oil, gas, and metals, remains one of the poorest in Russia. Vladimir Putin's government cares little for its inhabitants, and the wealth extracted from this land is sent to Moscow without benefiting the local population. This blatant inequality has fueled growing anger, especially among the younger generations. The war in Ukraine has exacerbated this discontent. Many young Siberians have been sent to the front lines, lured by promises of pay, only to find themselves without basic living conditions and, for many, without hope of returning. The mortality rate among these young soldiers is terrifying, and the absurdity of the war only deepens their despair. Chapter 3. The birth of the Siberian Battalion. But there is hope. As the war in Ukraine rages on, a group of Siberians has decided to resist in an unexpected way. The Siberian Battalion, made up primarily of Russian dissidents and Siberian volunteers, has pledged to fight not alongside Russia, but against it. Their goal is clear: to free Siberia and all of Russia from the yoke of the Kremlin. The Siberian Battalion was founded under the leadership of Vladislav O5, a former Russian intelligence agent. This group consists of former Russian military personnel who deserted the army and young Siberians frustrated by decades of exploitation. Their motivation is clear. They want not only to stop the war in Ukraine, but also to overthrow a government that has betrayed them and used them as cannon fodder. Chapter 4. Decisive battles and strategic sabotage. Although the number of soldiers in the Siberian Battalion is relatively modest, about 300 soldiers, their impact has been far greater than their size. This group, alongside other battalions of Russian dissidents, has carried out strategic attacks against Russian infrastructure. In 2024, for example, the Siberian Battalion took part in large-scale attacks on Belgorod and Kursk, cities located in Russia. These attacks targeted fuel depots, pipelines, and critical military infrastructure, inflicting significant losses on Russian logistics. Their goal: to disrupt the supply of ammunition and make it more difficult for Russian troops to advance. But their resistance isn't limited to physical attacks. The Siberian Battalion has also played a key role in defending Ukrainian cities like Avdiivka, where the fighting was of unimaginable intensity. They fought not only for Ukraine, but for a future where Siberia could finally break free from the chains imposed by Moscow. Chapter 5. Political and symbolic impact. The impact of the Siberian Battalion goes far beyond the battlefield. Their struggle is a powerful symbol of resistance against an authoritarian regime that crushes individual freedoms and exploits the most vulnerable regions. Their actions have sent a clear message: Siberia will no longer remain silent in the face of injustice. For many Siberians, this battalion represents a glimmer of hope. If Ukraine succeeds, it could pave the way for greater autonomy for Siberia, allowing local populations to regain control of their resources and their future. Chapter 6. A Changing Siberia. Today, Siberia stands at a crossroads. On one side is the growing resistance of indigenous peoples and dissidents, represented by battalions like the Siberian Battalion. On the other is Vladimir Putin's exploitation policy, which continues to use Siberians as instruments of war and economic resources to fuel the Russian machine. The feeling of abandonment by the Kremlin is stronger than ever, and the idea of Siberian autonomy is gaining momentum. The role of the Siberian Battalion in this dynamic is essential. Their struggle is not just about Ukraine, but about all of Siberia, and by extension, Russia. Their hope is to change not only the course of the war, but also the future of their own land. Conclusion: Siberia, long overshadowed by Moscow's power, is now fighting for its freedom. The Siberian Battalion embodies the struggle for a better future. But this is not just a military war. It is a war for the soul of Siberia, for its culture, and for its sovereignty. If Ukraine succeeds in overthrowing Russia, it could mark the beginning of a new era for Siberia, an era where the local population takes control of its wealth and future. Stay with us to follow this fascinating story of resistance, rebellion, and hope. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video to raise awareness about the Siberian Battalion struggle.